Hi everyone, we're just going to give it a few more minutes for everyone to log in and then we will start the webinar. Thank you. Everyone, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Nikki Sowden, and before we get started, I'd like to review a few housekeeping notes. Number one, all phone lines are on mute to avoid interruptions during the broadcast. Number two, our session today will include a live Q&A session. You may submit your questions at any time during the presentation using the questions panel located to the bottom of your screen. And finally, the recording of today's session will be available on our websites within the next few business days. For those of you that may not be familiar with Riskonnect, I'd firstly like to provide a brief introduction. Riskonnect is the leading integrated risk management software solution provider. Our technology empowers organizations with the ability to anticipate, manage, and respond in real time to strategic and operational risks across the extended enterprise. In July, Riskonnect announced the acquisition of Castellan to better fulfill the ultimate goal of bringing risk under one roof. Together, we will help you build integrated risk management functions with end-to-end visibility and true enterprise resilience through software, consulting, and managed services. Now, before we begin the discussion, I'd like to once again remind everyone to submit your questions at any time using the webinar question panel on the bottom of your screen. We'll take as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. And now, please join me in welcoming our presenters for today's broadcast. Ken Clark. Ken is a senior consultant with Riskonnect based in the UK. His background is with blue chip companies in technology, banking and oil, and over 25 years, he has designed, implemented and managed BCM programs in Asia, Africa, the EU, Middle East, North America, the UK and Ireland. Ken has developed and delivered training and awareness of BCM and crisis management across organisations, including the C-suite and board members. In addition to his BCM and crisis roles, Ken is also a member of the BCI East of England Management Committee. Next up, we have Jill Driscoll. Jill is the Senior Solution Consultant with Riskonnect based in the UK. Her background is in banking and insurance, and she has over 20 years' experience working in the business continuity and resilience industry in a variety of different roles, including implementations, delivering training, exercises, and incident response. Jill has worked with multiple clients from across many sectors, helping them to build and develop the BCNR software to meet their specific business requirements. Jill is an associate member of the Business Continuity Institute, seeking to upgrade to member of the Business Continuity Institute. And lastly, we have Steve Barnett. Steve is a UK-based senior solutions consultant at Riskonnect. He has worked in a number of business continuity roles over the past 17 years within the telecommunications, financial, building services and outsourced provider sectors, both within teams and as the business continuity manager, progressing their continuity programs and delivering awareness training. Currently is part of the Riskonnect BCNR implementation team who focus on enabling new clients to set up the BCNR system to best meet their requirements. Now, without further ado, I'll now hand you over to our presenters. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining the call today. It's been a whirlwind of change and innovation in business continuity over the recent years. And I'm sure some of you have had to adapt to the evolving situations, maybe enjoying the challenges and the variety of change, maybe feeling a bit overawed by the expectations of your organization. in today's session, what you'll hear is our views, our opinions. We may agree, we may disagree, or we may agree to disagree. But having this opportunity to share is always a healthy experience. So over the next few slides, as Nikki mentioned, you can post any questions into the questions section on the bottom of your screen. Could we move to the next slide, please? So very simple agenda today. We don't like being heavy on the presentation slides, so it'll be more a discussion between us as opposed to purely speaking at you and off a script. So could you go to the next one, please, Nikki? So where did we come from? Well, some of us have been in BC for many years, in my case, over 25 years. And I got involved at the time of the London Docklands bombing in 1996. The company I was working for at that time didn't have a business continuity team, strategy, or plans. And suddenly, business continuity became the #1 priority for everyone, up to and including the CEO of the organization. And everybody had a view on what should be done, but no one really had any knowledge or experience to base anything on. So what did we do? Well, we cut down a small forest of trees to produce enough paper for the reams of plans that we would create. It was even suggested that we should use blood-proof paper so the plans could be used during an event. I think that takes dedication and commitment a bit too far. Then there was the question of who should be responsible for this new BC function. I've reported into so many different functions over the years that I felt like an orphan being passed from one foster home to the other. At this point, I'd like to bring my colleague Steve in. Steve, what's your thoughts on the background to how BC has evolved?
Oh, it's from when I first started and learned about BC. Initially as a BC plan manager in a technical role that I conducted at the time. So I was responsible for looking after the plan and working with the BC coordinator to sort of get that reviewed, etc., right through to then being part of a team to manage. It's changed from what was then, where things are held in fireproof safes, and we looked at work area recovery and alternate sites to where we are today, and it'd be interesting to see where we move to in the future as well. So, I mean, in terms of my history, I mean, if I look at some of the big events that sort of shaped my career, the first one is 9/11, where I wasn't in a BC role at the time. I was in that technical role that I mentioned. But not only was how we managed the technical aspects of the role I was in at the time, but the engagement with the BC team, both immediately during and afterwards, but also like 2 years later, where there were government inquiries going on and they were still using the information we provided to them to sort of say, yes, this is what we did, this is why we did it, how we did it, and this was the impact of what we did. COVID was a classic example for everyone, I think, in more recent times. Then I was the sole BC manager in the business I was in, so having to get them bootstraps up where they didn't have a pandemic plan to having one fairly quickly and engaging the crisis team and providing the worth of them getting together was a key factor too. But on a personal point, what really was a big moment for me was going solo for the first time, moving away from a team environment. It was a bit enforced with a career change, but being the BC person and being able to manage it at that point. But I know Jill has also sort of got some experience on the thoughts as well. So Jill, what's your thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, personally for myself, I got brought into BC at the time of the Bishopsgate bomb in the City of London. And it was at a point when, like Ken, there was no BC. We had an admin manager that had all our telephone numbers. And the next thing you know, we couldn't go to work. We all ended up in a training centre, displaced, trying to do our job, which was really difficult. And obviously to where we are now, we've been through the iterations of, we've had recovery sites. Since COVID, recovery sites seem to be a thing of the past, and more people are moving away from that or they're working from home. So the changes, it feels like an ever-evolving cycle. due to the technology that we've got. And let's face it, no one would have got through the pandemic without the technology we now have, would they?
Exactly. And I think for me as well, I don't know about you, but I've worked in various different business units or functions within a team, within an organization. I've worked in finance, probably one of the best two were in a GRC team. So, you know, the governance and regulatory control was brilliant because it pulled the important elements together. I've worked in security and also InfoSec as well as a BC manager, and there are very different views within each element as to what's the best way to approach BC. And Ken, I think I remember talking to you once about you felt a bit of an orphan at some times when you were punched around. So is that a correct thing?
It is, and I think because the focus on BC tends to increase when there is some significant event going on, that's when people get interested. At other times, we're almost like audit. No, nobody loves you really. They don't want to know you until they need you to be there to do something for them. And I'm sure most people on the call probably have similar experiences of being, moved to different areas, feeling they have a big role to play at times, feeling they're being ignored at other times, depending on the situation and what's going on in their particular world at that time. If people want to share some of their experience, the sort of strange places that they have reported into, stick it into the questions. It'd be interesting to see who's got the strangest reporting line over the years.
I mean, for me though, one of the key things I've learned over the last 17 years or over my working career is it's not just where you report into, but it's the culture of the team you are in and at that point in time. Because I've worked in 2 or 3 security roles, for example, and the last one that I left had a very different culture to the previous ones, and that is no disrespect to anyone that was involved. It was just how it worked at the time, the organizational structure, etc. So, as I say, it was not one person, but the latter culture was very built that everyone mucked in together. You were the expert, you were listened to, you imparted knowledge across, but you picked it up from other people and you learnt as well. You were given wings to fly with. I had to justify a lot of things I was doing at the time to say, this is the value you're going to get. But the manager I had said, yeah, go for it, go and do it. But I would do it this way, and it was just, to me, the culture was a real key thing. But again, part of the culture is getting buy-in on BC as well. As you rightly mentioned there, Ken, most people go, I haven't got time for you until the bad stuff happens when they want something done there and then. But again, Jill, we've spoken before about similar things from your side.
Yeah. It comes down to the fact as well is, the issue I had where I worked was when it came to exercising, well, you can't exercise that because that's going to make us look bad when we reported into IT. Put into CISA, we can't exercise that because that's going to make us look bad. So they put that constraint on you as well, where ideally BC is one of those things. It should have a direct report into someone quite senior, because then no one can say, oh, we can't do this, because all we're trying to do is teach them how to do stuff and how to make it better. We're not there to make them look bad. We're trying to highlight the weaknesses when we're in a calm situation, when we're not in a war scenario, when we're running around with our heads all over the place.
Yep, great. Can we go to the next slide, please, Nikki? So where are we going? This is always the one for me. If only we could look into a crystal ball and see what's coming our way, life would be so easy for us. It'd be even better if we could get some winning numbers on the Euro lottery. I'd be welcoming that very much. But but where are we going? We know where we've come from. We have we understand. It's always evolving. It's always changing. But how are things changing? I personally feel that there was a significant and fast pace of change in response to COVID. What we've seen with that is demand for recovery sites is dwindling, as Jill mentioned a few minutes ago. The people concentration risk is different now because we don't have lots of people in single buildings, and the availability of cloud services is making ITD a much more resilient place as well. Jill, what other drivers do you see are going to be there, are going to be prominent there going forward?
In coming forward, well, obviously AI is coming in, and you know that's going to be a biggie that we're going to have to sort of look at in the BC space. So just trying to think of other things. And
do you see regulation having any significant impact?
Well, OpRes, obviously, you know, OpRes, not only OpRes has kind of been adopted around multiple different countries now as well, isn't it? Variations of it, various different things, and how that's changing the landscape, you know, from traditional BC where we're concentrating on just our processes and recovering them. Well, we're now trying to look at the whole piece, which in ideal makes sense because we're looking at, for example, you know, the whole business service. What makes up that business service? What goes into it? What, you know, how's that going to change if something goes down, and where the link in the chain breaks, isn't it, really? Stephen, any thoughts from you? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, when I think back to when I first started, there was no such thing as well, there were the good practice guidelines, but there wasn't an international standard for BC at that point. So that's come in, and that's fantastic. You could argue when you look at other standards like 27001, BC still has a light touch element from what I recall of that standard, but ultimately they work hand in glove. You know, one discipline looks at one and the other looks at the other. I think best practice is always the good thing with good practice guidelines, and the fact that we've had the latest ones issued this week are great. You know, to have those constantly being updated as we go forwards.
Yeah, no, we've had a comment put in the chat from Sandra, and it's a very interesting comment that Sandra's put there. She lists all the different areas she reported into over time, but she also said that she often felt she was a brain on the business budgets until something happened, and I think that's always been the case with BC, hasn't it? Nobody really wants to invest in it. Nobody really wants to pay for it, but they expect it to be there magically when they need it.
Exactly. You know, I've had the same. I mean, I've had numerous managers sort of justifying the team's existence at some point or during peacetime, if I may put it, term it that way. You know, and you know, why are we doing this? And you know, I've got better things to do than talk to you, and various other technical phrases that may have come along. But yeah, it's always been a little bit of a fight to get that. I do think, though, on a personal point and talking across, you know, to other colleagues and clients, that COVID has changed that focus. It's brought it to the fore more. You know, personally, when I talk about it, that there's a better buy-in now, and I think as an industry, and especially anyone joining the industry, I think it's a brilliant time because there's better engagement. But again, Jill, I can see you nodding, but your thoughts there.
That's until the next big thing comes along, Steve. So yeah. You know, we had a major flood, and the focus was BC, but gradually over time that trickles down and they forget, and then they're back to their old habits, and you're then running around chasing people. So it's good, but I'm sure there will come a point where the next big thing comes along, and what we've learned through COVID, you know, people that need us will forget.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, we might be in one of those quiet periods. Now that could be the next sort of phrase here. Stacey on the call just mentioned that she was let go at one stage. There's always cost cutting being looked at, and when it's quiet, when it's peaceful, it's always, you know, the BC world can seem like an easy target there.
Yeah, I mean, I had a client, and the BC team, the whole BC team, we were working through on a implementation with them, and the whole BC team were made redundant. Yeah.
Jill, you sort of brought in the operational resilience in your answer earlier, and something that I've seen, and especially if you're on LinkedIn and you're looking at some of the posts and some of the jobs that are going up there, OpRes seems to be the naming convention, that everything is built around OpRes, to the point that when you read some of it, you almost think it's in competition with BC. What's your thoughts on how the two should interact?
Well, there's a natural link, isn't there? You've got to, you know, you still got to do BC. You still need to understand the ground roots. You need to understand, you know, what is it that we're trying to protect. We still need to know that, you know, for our business services, they're made up of a number of different things, and there'll be processes from across different areas of the business that make these up. So these, where it's all about op-res, and I know Steve personally has had some clients where we've had that, where they're running them in silo, which it doesn't work. And certainly when you're using our tool's all about integrating, because there's a natural linkage there. So Steve, do you want to sort of go through some of the things, challenges you've had with clients that you're working with when you have that?
We can, and I'm picking up on what Yusuf has said on the chat about arguing that resilience professional roles are critical in supporting the risk of the organisation faces. I do believe that the BC professional and stroke resilience professional bridges those silos that exist in the business. Through no fault of people's own, businesses grow organically. They acquire other businesses. So by natural business evolution, silos are created. Again, in a previous technical environment, telecoms in world I worked in, I think there was 3 business mergers, and we ended up with a red, blue, and green type network, telecoms network. It was all one network, but we differentiated them at that point. A very crude element of or example of silos, but people can work in their own little bit. HR only look at HR. Risk tend to look at wider, but marketing look at marketing, sales look at sales, etc. Whereas the BC Resilience Professional takes that wide overall operational resilience review, and I think the standard for me has been brilliant for bringing in, whilst the financial industry is regulated and has to provide the evidence, the ethos of what you do applies to any industry to say, what are you providing your clients? And therefore, if something fails in that chain, what's the impact to the client and how quickly can you get that service back? I think is a great way of building and expanding the BC role.
Thank you. And just plugging a previous webinar we did, we at Riskonnect did a webinar alongside the BCI a few months back on op-res, and anyone who wants to know a bit more, and again, our views on how that should be working alongside BC, you can find that on the BCI website. Can we go to the next slide, please, Nikki? So probably the biggest change that's coming everyone's way, not just our way. Now, how is AI going to impact our world? I'm not sure how much it's currently being used in BC, but I'm sure we all have thoughts on just what could happen. And a little anecdote that I was looking at. So it almost feels like we're going back to the 1800s and the Industrial Revolution when traditional hand looms were being replaced by weaving machines, and the employers were cutting jobs, cutting wages, and protesters who were known as the Luddites were doing all they could to disrupt the implementation of the new technology. I don't know if anyone on the call is planning to go and have a fight with a robot anytime soon, but how about now? In the 21st century, probably more technophobes than Luddites, but how do we see the way that we can adapt? How can AI really help us as BC to take things forward? Steve, any thoughts there?
I do. I've got to admit, I'm excited and worried about AI in equal measure. And I'll go on the excited bit first, if I may, at that point, because as a BC person, I always tend to look on the negative side of the what if something happens and what you need to do is look after stuff. So let's look at the rose-tinted glass bit. For me, it would be lovely as a BC person, rather than as I've done historically, whether it's Word, Excel, or on a software platform, you're asking the BC professional is interviewing the team, or the team member, asking them what's going on, but you're having to type something in. You can't take everything in at that point. Now, whether it's a bloke and I can't multitask as well as others, I don't know, but you miss stuff when you're interviewing. Whereas for me, to be able to switch on a system, an AI system, and then sit and talk as we're talking now, but do it as an interview. So you're talking to the person through what you want. When they mention these little oddities that they don't think are important, but you explore it, and it opens up this massive avenue which you need to go down because there's a risk there at that point in time. I actually think that AI would be really good for listening to that interview, capturing the information, producing the BIA as you're speaking, or refining as you're speaking with interviewing that individual. The plan can be produced at that point. So at the end of the interview, you go, there's your BIA, there's your plan. Can you review it? Can you check that we've got everything correct? That is a massive sort of, time saving, and I think a benefit because it would use the practitioner's skills of interviewing to explore the right questions rather than having to try and type, ask, whatever, follow a script, etc. And then from there, we can use that to sort of, AI to manage the BC program. That could be show me vulnerabilities in a certain area or show me the plans you've got for a certain office, etc. We can gather those things together. But equally, we could use it more effectively for horizon scanning, both near and far. So we've had what, 4 storms so far this year in the UK alone. Exceptional. You could argue it's climate change, and we might come onto that later. But again, we can look at what the threats that are being posed by those immediately straight away. Long term, we could say, well, what's coming up in, what's happening in the news, what's happening on social media, etc. Aggregate them at that point. However, the caveat to that is we need to be careful, because are we using our own AI tools or are we using ChatGPT? And therefore, is ChatGPT segmented, or is it going to be providing your information globally at that point? What are we going to do about misinformation or deep fakes at that point in time? To name but 2 as we go through. But that's my view. I do see AI having a lot of benefits with BC, but there are the natural security aspects that we all need to consider going forwards. Again, Jill, I know this is something we've been talking about, occasionally. Any thoughts there yourselves?
I think it's the unknown, isn't it? Again, and I see the same as you. There are benefits, but again, we don't know what we don't know yet. So until we start seeing what it's going to do, and there are, we've talked about it as a team around, people pretending to be somebody else. That's what's going to happen. And reading up about it, it's a worry. It's a worry for for business continuity, not just for us, but all sorts of cyber type things that are going to happen. So hopefully, we can. There's a way that it can be regulated, and what have you. But my husband keeps telling me it's Terminator. that's what we're heading towards.
Well, potentially that's the bad side of it, obviously, at that point. But I mean, I do agree. I think it's going to open up, so much. I mean, there's some brilliant, InfoSec professionals and security professionals out there that do an amazing job, etc. But the extra security around what you're doing, how you're going to, yes, you could use AI for spotting cyber attacks and stuff, but what if AI is cyber attacking you? How are you going to deal with it then at that point? So again, that's the nasty bit of it. So what additional security are you going to do? Equally, how are we as BC professionals going to be managing AI at this point? And again, it's like you say, it's an unknown, but we can at least try and steer it with our business wide view, I think, to say this is the benefit as a business you will get from it. These are the risks you would get from it, because certain people will say we're going this way, but they might need sort of reining in a bit at that point. But again, Ken, what's your thoughts?
Yeah. So I agree with everything you said there. And when you mention about who's managing the AI element. So I think within BC, many of us will have been in a situation where we've got fantastic plans, fantastic assessments, but it's just so much data. And during an event, someone suddenly asks, well, what's the impact of X across the whole organization? And you end up scrambling across loads and loads of plans. So I see AI as being something that does that legwork. No, it shows us where the risks are, but it still comes back to you've got to have the right data there in the first place. And I think that for me is more the challenge. I think people could very easily just say, oh, AI does it, and then they don't think they need to to worry about it. I think there still needs to be that element of making sure that the right information is going out. If you want to get the right right information is going in to get the right information coming out. But it does, it excites me as well. I think any advances in technology is fantastic, and I think AI at the moment is either the golden child waiting to change our lives, or it's the big bad monster in the corner for some people, and it's too early yet to understand which way it's going to be and just how it is going to impact everyone.
No, I agree with that. And again, I think this is going to be a very fast moving thing. I don't mean as in next month we'll get, there'll be an AI BC tool in place. Well, there might be those in development. I don't know. But when I say rapidly developing, I think I'm talking over the next year or two. I think we're really going to get a bigger picture. But what you said earlier as well, I mean, Brian Zawada mentioned it at his keynote at the BCI World a couple of weeks ago about the digital model of the business. And certainly within the work Jill and myself do with helping clients onto our platform is very much that model driven. It's using golden source data to come onto our system, because we can't invent that data. It's got to be the client's data quite rightly at that point. And again, certain clients have it nailed on. There are other clients which, again, because they've grown embryonically or they've grown in a certain structured, unstructured way maybe at that point, or branched out accordingly, it's not as tight as it could be, and therefore there are silos of data pockets as well as silos of people pockets. And as you mentioned there, Ken, is getting all that together in a good consistent view. Because I've played with ChatGPT a couple of times. I've not played with it much, to be honest with you. But what I very quickly learned, you have to be very specific with the question you're posing at that point. And I think then that's an element, again, what we need to be considering going forwards as an industry and as a discipline is what specifics are we asking for? What are we going to need to ask for?
So I think the key message coming out of the session today is that BC has always evolved, and it will continue to evolve. What we're likely to see now is the pace and the drivers for change might be different to what they were previously. But as BC professionals, we need to be prepared for whatever that change is going to be going forward. And whether it impacts the work we do or whether we have work as well. No, we need to be prepared. We need to understand what is going to be, what's going to be coming down the road. So with that, I think I now hand back to Nikki.
Thank you. Hi guys. Now, before I begin the Q&A session, I'd like to bring your attention to some of our useful resources. At Riskonnect, we are committed to creating resources that help organisations successfully improve awareness and ultimately the need for business continuity and resilience. Our latest ebook, The Getting Started with Business Resilience, is the go-to resource for anyone interested in better managing their company's risk and resilience. This easy-to-follow guide contains a 5-step framework that will show you how to remove these boundaries and successfully navigate the many steps involved to achieve optimal business resilience. Download today. It's available on our website, www.riskonnect.com, where you'll find lots of other helpful resources, including webinars and guides and ebooks. Right then, without further ado, it's now time for our Q&A session. We've already received lots of good questions to get through. So without further ado, our first question is, what can businesses do to prepare for potential cyber threats and data breaches in the future?
If I take that one, I think it's all about first of all having good prevention in place. Most companies have got their InfoSec teams, and they're constantly monitoring and they're looking for potential threats. And you have to have that prevention in place. Something will always get through. That's just what happens. But organizations still need to prepare, plan, and exercise what they would do in the event of a cyber incident. I think sometimes people feel, well, we've got this software to detect viruses, so we don't need to worry about anything. But the bad guys will always catch up eventually. So for me, it's you have to keep the preparation going, keep planning, and keep exercising.
I guess to that, Ken, as well, also training and education. So a lot of companies run these exercises or these courses where you're learning about what to look out for, so your staff are aware as well. So it's not just about us being in the the BC or the business resilience team, whatever we're called. It's more than that, isn't it? Because it's the staff that might slip up. So it's making sure that they've got the right CBT learning in for them as well.
And for me, absolutely, Jill, I couldn't agree more. And it's amazing that the phishing, sort of training that we all go through, even if you're an experienced person, you can still get caught out. You don't quite check the email properly, and you get caught there. For me, backing up your own data is a key thing, especially in this cloud environment that we've got, where you're using SaaS products. Riskonnect is one, obviously, and AWS, etc. But it's your data that's being sort of attacked at that point in time, and having the backups and accurate backups, and recent backups of your data to allow you to then pull that back, pull that back at a good point in time when you're safe is a key thing too, because people can steal data and then you're stuck. The NHS, I think, had the issue a few years ago, didn't it, with the WannaCry, if I recall it correctly. But yeah, backups is a biggie for me.
It's great.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Ken. You.
I was going to say, do you have the next question, please?
Yeah, the next question we've got: what value can a BC professional add if the organisation lack the BC culture? It's not a one-man job. How can a single resource be effective in times of crisis when the organisation and functions lack proper planning and focus on BC? Any advice, please?
For me, when I was in my last role before I joined Riskonnect, I was that one-person band. And yes, my immediate manager knew about BC, my immediate line management knew about BC, but a lot of people didn't. The way I approached it, and I'm not saying this is the right thing, this is just how I approached it, and it did seem to bring value to me. I very quickly spoke with the CEO and made sure that I got their buy-in, and then I conducted I think they're called strategic BIAs in the good practice guidelines, but I went to each divisional director and sat with them and said, look, this is what I'm about. Tell me what keeps you awake at night. This horrible saying, but I've never thought of a better one. But what's the importance to them at that point? And that then they then told me who to talk to. It gave me some direction to come down to that business. And I started then, because I'd spoken to that director, when I then approached them and they were trying to dismiss me of I'm too busy. Well, hold on a second. The director knows about this. We are going to talk about this and they expect a response by this time. That helped on that buying at that point. So effectively, I approached a top-down approach at that point. That was me personally. And I say other businesses may work differently. That did work for me on that last role. But Ken, with your previous experience in Cambridgeshire and stuff, what challenges did you face?
Well, the best one I ever faced was when I was being interviewed. I was on, I think, my 6th round of interviews for a job at one company, and this was going to be the final one. And I was being interviewed by the COO and one of the company founders. And the founder, the founder that was there, actually in the interview turned around and said, "I'm not actually sure why we're interviewing for this role. Nothing ever happens to us. We're not at any risk." And I took a deep breath, and I then really wanted to get that job because I thought we need to educate people to understand that it's not always the obvious and big things that are going to hurt you. There's so much that that can happen to an organization that people don't even think about. And I remember about 6 months, 8 months later, I was doing a crisis exercise with the C-suite and this founder, was in there as well. And he came up to me afterward and said, "Do you remember when I asked it why we're doing this?" He said, "I understand it now." And I think, it's very disheartening sometimes being in BC, because people, you don't feel valued sometimes, and you feel you're always going up against things. But I've always tried to demonstrate how the business is going to benefit by having the good BC, understanding what they need to do, understanding the risks. And if you can get that message over, but it makes life a lot easier, but you have to get that message over at the very top and all the way down to really get the good buy-in. And I think earlier I mentioned that people sometimes look at us like we're audit, we're coming to try and catch them out. So you'll never be everyone's best friend, but I think if you can show the value that you're adding and that your program is adding, and try and keep it simple for the business, make it very clear to them. You don't want to be using their resources all the time. You don't want to be going talk to them every other day. You want to get to the point where they're actually quite pleased for you to come and see them, because you're helping them. You're making their life easier for them. And I think that's always the way to go with that. Nikki, do you have another one?
Yes, we do. Yes. So the next question is, in the face of climate change, what measures do you think that businesses can take in the UK to ensure continuity in the event of natural disasters or extreme weather conditions?
So if I take that one, so it's very similar to the answer I gave about the cyber threat. As basically, we can't manage or control the climate or environmental issues, but we can help to reduce the impact by knowing what's critical, what's at risk, and what mitigation is available. So again, it comes back to the prepare, plan, and exercise. I think if you try to guess what the next big event's going to be, something else will turn around and bite you instead. But I feel that we shouldn't really focus on what the potential threats are. We should be always looking at what's the impact if we can't do business, regardless of what it is.
So,
any thoughts?
Steve and I were talking about this earlier, and one of the things we said is, back to those, if people are still in buildings, it's knowing the building, doing that building risk assessment, making sure is that building on a floodplain? Is it liable to flooding? Is it somewhere that there's potential for power outages and stuff like that? They become more critical with the environmental stuff, those building plans, because at the end of the day, the people that run the buildings, they are the ones that will be telling us the risks, and then we can, as you say, Ken, then plan for it. We can have something in place. We can have a recovery plan to say, okay, we know that this is potential. Have we already got a site somewhere that we can move to if that happens? So personally, for myself, where I worked, we had a major flood, and luckily we were able to move our staff. We had 2 buildings in Leeds, and we were able to move staff from one to the other and then put them back into a building that we'd exited. But that's not always going to be the case. Okay, now probably is. More people are moving out of buildings. There's less buildings. They're reducing the size of them. But, it's what happens, isn't it? Steve, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Jill, and yeah, it was a good convo as always we had at that point. And again, picking up what Ken said, I think as BC professionals or resilience professionals, we collectively are used to sort of reevaluating things as we go through. So, what might been a safe distance from a floodplain years ago may not be now, because of the volume of water that falls in a particular point. What was a safe road to pass isn't now because the rivers hasn't been dredged, therefore the river overflows and therefore blocks a road, and there's an approach road and stuff. So as professionals, I think we will look at these things, to say, well, this has started to happen. Let me look at this pattern and reevaluate where we're going through. Again, the biggest issue then is you can't lift a building and move it somewhere else. You just have to try and, as you say, make sure that the if you've got your data center on the ground floor, that it's protected at that point, and various bits, rather than it being by an open door, and sandbags can only do so much. But I think it is something we have to look at. Likewise, again, with temperature change, I mean, look at the summer temperatures we've had over in the UK over the last couple of years, or 2-3 years, etc. It's been excessive at some points at that point in time, and again, that takes its toll on buildings and building infrastructure and people that are there, but also people working from home. Both their working environment, where they may not have fully aircon there, they just got a plethora of fans by them to keep cool, but when they're at home, they're looking after family and pets, etc., that divert their attention. So it's being mindful of those, and therefore the impact they have as well.
Yeah. Yusuf on the call raised an interesting question as well about have you found aligning the strategic goals of the organization with the value that resilience brings? Does that help? And again, from a personal point of view, a role I had previously, business continuity as an entity was registered as a corporate risk on the corporate risk register. And people kept saying to me, how are you going to get that off of there? It's not good having this on the corporate risk register. And I said, well, no, I actually want it to be on there because it ensures it gets focus from the C-suite and the board. I said, as long as we're showing we're progressing and we're managing that risk. But I didn't want to be taken off. I wanted that to be visible to the right people, so that they would be saying, well, what do we need to do with this? So I think, yeah, if your organization's got strategic goals, if it's got a risk register, see how you can make use of these to help drive your BC program forward. Do we have any more, Nikki?
Yes, we do.
Sorry.
Our next question is, with the rise of remote and hybrid work models, how are businesses adapting their continuity plans to support a dispersed workforce effectively?
Jill, do you want to start with that, or shall I go on that one?
You go first.
Cool. For me, the key thing, again, I'm coming back to the COVID thing where I previously worked, where it was obvious that, it was started to become apparent that we were going to be, sort of moving to a wholly work from home environment. I asked the question about how many concurrent users could the VPN at the time accept, and it was something like 200 for a business that was like 1,000, 2,000 colleagues strong. Well, that quickly got updated to match that as a preemptive strike, and I think that's where the cloud-based infrastructure we have now is good. Again, a former CISO I worked for said, he was explicit by saying, "Fix IT, you fix BC." Well, actually, COVID came along, and IT was the most brilliant enabler, but it didn't fix BC at that point in time. So I think it's very much that about getting that cloud base, making sure people can access correctly and okay onto the relevant systems. Is being aware of people's well-being when they're at home, because some people need more personal interaction than others that are very happy moving, talking to people via Zoom, but being in their own environment, etc. So I think there's a lot of different elements there, and flexible working policies. I remember years ago when it was like, I'm working from home on a Friday, oh, you're skiving, type of statement. Whereas now it's proven that work from home works. People do work from home. You're not watching the clock and having to do a 10-hour day to prove you're working from home, that type of thing. It's accepted, it's practiced, it's effective, as we're doing today with this webinar as an example. But I think some of those things are what helps to drive the culture. But Jill, your thoughts on those and more.
I mean, yeah, it's interesting what COVID did. Again, in a previous role, I was only allowed to work from home 1 day a week. And if I wanted to do any more, it was like, no, you've got to come into the office. But COVID, so many people were forced in, everyone was forced into working from home, including call centres, which I found amazing because at one point they could only have about 10 of our call centre staff actually working from home. And all of a sudden, they're all home-based, they've all got laptops and working. But I think it's kind of people are going back to more of a mix, aren't they? Where, companies are saying, well, actually, we need you to come back into the office. You've got to be back in the office at least 3 days a week. So you've got to then pick and choose again what days that you're going to go in. They might have a day where they all go in and go, okay, this is the day that everyone comes in. Personally, for us, we haven't had that. We are all home based, and it works well. You know, we're all in different parts of the country, so it for me it makes sense. You know, why do we need an office, you know, to go to when we can all get on Teams and manage it?
Yeah, and I think there's a gap at the moment in the way that BC plans are being adapted for the hybrid working. I don't think there's really been enough focus on the fact that people are working from home, and it could be from a well-being, from a health and safety, to, you know, okay, if you're in the south of England, then potentially people are spread far and wide. But just being at people working from home, you could still have an event that impacts a lot of people. And I don't think anyone's really got a backup plan now to, if people can't work from home, you know, or go to a coffee shop. But if you had an infrastructure type problem, you know, what's going to happen then? And I think working from home is great. I think it really has moved on the recovery aspects, great. But, you know, if working from home or remotely becomes the next big event, you know, we're back to that point again where we're scrambling around trying to figure out, well, what should we be doing now?
Yeah.
So, Nikki, I think that was all the questions you had.
Yes, thank you. So I'll just like to just take the opportunity to wrap up today's webinar. But before we do, I'd like to take the time for a few thank yous. I'd like to start with a big thank you to today's fantastic presenters, Ken, Jill and Steve, for their time and expertise this afternoon. Great job, guys. I'd also like to thank you, the audience, for attending today's webinar. The recording and slides will be available on the BCI website in the next few business days, so keep an eye out for that. And don't forget to visit our resource centre on the Riskonnect website, www.riskonnect.com, for more informative content and engaging webinar recordings. So all that leaves me to say is that I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and goodbye.
Thank you, Nikki.